coming to the tomb on the 25th of April this year, and we're still looking for a willing support cast to play and act. I've also picked this because it shows Leslie Smith. I don't know whether you've encountered her. She's Professor of Medieval Intellectual History at Harris, Manchester. And she took the role of the precursor or expositor ludi, as it's called, in the Innsbruck Easterplay. So the passage we are going to look at today. And we decided, since we were doing an overview of all of salvation history from creation to Last Judgment, we needed some bridging narrative, and really discovered how useful it is to have this kind of prologue speaker. So we wrote new mock medieval English introductions for each of the plays, and that's the passage we are going to look at today. All right, so the whole structure will be fairly simple, chunks of about 250 lines per lecture. So 5 lectures for the Innsbruck Easterplay, even though it's probably slightly later play, but since it's a complete play rather than the fragments of the Muri Easterplay, it's easier to start with a full story and then fit the fragments into that. And then week 6 and 7 for the fragments of Muri. And as a perspective, in week 8, we'll look at some other Easterplays from other areas in Germany. I'm particularly interested in northern Germany, and the Low German Easterplay tradition is something much less explored, but crucial also because it's a bit of a missing link to the medieval English mystery play tradition. All right, and then 25th of April is the Saturday of North Week. There will be from noon to 5 p.m. the whole new cycle. I said we would do mainly close reading, but just a few key facts which we need to understand before we look at the play itself. So it's part of a cycle, as the mystery cycle we did here. So since we are just looking at the Easterplay, we are missing some of the introductory material which had been done before the Assumption of Mary. So the kind of general introduction needs to be factored in to understand where the Osterspiel is starting from. We know that this manuscript, which is about this format, was finished in 1391. That is astonishingly early for 2 reasons. One is that we are dealing with oral literature that tends to be recorded much later than it is written, and the other is that from other European countries such as England, the whole mystery plays really only come into writing in the 15th century. And we can be sure that it's at least a generation, if not 2, older, because where it's written is probably in Kloster Neustift, Brixen. If any of you have done Oswald von Bolkenstein, one of the craziest Minnesinger of the Middle Ages, colorful, multilingual, obscene, funny, deeply religious, well worth reading. He died there, so it's in nowadays Austria, and the dialect of the piece is Thuringian. So even if your German geography is slightly wobbly, it's quite a bit distant from Austria. Written on Italian paper, which shows how these texts and the materiality traveled across Europe. So it was probably written somewhere in Thuringia much earlier in the 14th century and then copied by somebody who had heard it there for performance in Austria. And it's written in a what's called Heberegister format, which is basically a business format. So you divide a A4 paper or in the middle and write it in two columns like that, which is a format which is handy actually for holding if you are a director who has to do the prompts for the actors. So we don't have a theatre play as you know it from Shakespeare or whatever as or Brecht, where you have full stage directions, full text for everybody, and even perhaps an introduction saying how the director wants it to be done. We have just what is necessary for somebody to give cues to the actors. So that means that, for example, all the Latin elements aren't included because there the director would rely on the people to have it from their own liturgical source. Next to Kate, there's just the one place. Yeah. Can you manage? Yeah. There is a brilliant Loriot sketch about a flutist trying to give a concert, and he has to delay it by 5 minutes because there's a late arrival every other minute, so everybody keeps shuffling on it. But it adds performativity and drama to the. And so for other plays, we simply have, for example, the role for one of the actors. And for example, we have just a Mary Magdalene role for a Low German play from Wienhausen, because it would be much too costly to write out everything for everybody. So you just write out what's needed for one person. And we know actually that even in Shakespeare's time, there was the anxiety that people, actors might sell or pass on their knowledge of the play to somebody before it had been performed. So actors sometimes only found out at the performance what actually was going on around them. So they had only had got hold of their own role. All right. The structure of it is that there are different loci. So you have to imagine a stage setting where different actions take place at different points of the stage or the marketplace where it would be acted out. And so these places where the action is structure the play. So you don't have the Aristotelian units of time and place, but you and actually the audience might move from the tomb to the house where the merchant is back to the tomb. And that's more or less also the structure we are using today. So today we'll just hopefully get to the resurrection. So this is a stage plan for a French mystery play from the 15th century, where you can see, well, probably can't see, but imagine on the left-hand side is paradise, on the right-hand side with the hell mouth is hell, and so Pilate's house is in the middle, Nazareth is there, so you can identify different loci, different places, and something like that must have been envisaged for the Innsbruck plays, because before the Assumption of Mary, so the play that precedes the Easter play, actors would already move into position, and then they would stay there put until the action moves to them. So the precursor announces nu wiegt ihm, so recede for Jesus, allgleich, beide Arme reich, wenn ist ein König, lobsam, Ufer der Burg soll stehen. So Jesus probably, as the actor dressed as a Jesus, would pass through the assembled audience and go to the place where his first action would take place. And so they would process in hierarchical order and then disperse on stage. And these are the groups that are announced. Primo exiet Jesus cum suis angelis, procedit cum via latoribus, precursor dicit, and then come all that. And these aren't virgins, they are virgins, the tribus puellis, so that's a typo of mine. And these would have included the three Marys, ready then to be used for the Easter play. All right. So after this play, the first play is over, of the Assumption of Mary, so the coronation of Mary in heaven. The expositor ludi, so who does the expositions of it, of the play, so who explains how everything is staged. He starts, but only after Pilate and his soldiers have come on stage, because they wouldn't have been needed for the Assumption, so they need to be put on stage. Or actually, it might also mean they come out from the place where onto the forefront of the stage. I think you'll pick up some of the oddities of the spelling of the Innsbruck Easter play while we are reading it out. So some of it is Thuringian, some of it is Thuringian mixed with a dialect of Austria that the scribe would have used. So there is no real system to the thing. Mainly the vowels are swapped. Just the reading matter is V and U are interchangeable, so that's just a matter of writing convention. The umlauts are very unsystematically. So sometimes you see a little suprascript E here, like müsse, but sometimes it's not marked at all, just as U, but you have to spell it as U. So, because it's not a normalized edited version, as you would have it for Parzival, or if you have done for paper for Helmbrecht, you might remember the Middle High German normalized version. There is a product of the 19th century of the edition by Panzer. If you were to print the version in the Ambraser Heldenbuch, it would pretty much look as unsystematic as that. Dialect features are, for example, in the first word, vornehmet instead of vernehmet, so the weakening of the unstressed syllables isn't as strong in Thuringian as it is in other dialects. And on the other hand, some unstressed syllables got completely lost, like gleiche instead of geliche, that would be in the normalized version. So on the first few slides, I've always put in MHG, Middle High German, and then given the, after the equal bars is the cognate modern German, and then in brackets is the English translation. So for and you have a lot of formulaic language in the Easterplay. So beide Arm und Rieche, Junge mit den Alden, das Gott müsse walden. Walden is constructed with genitive, so jemandes walten means to care for somebody, to look after somebody. Nedder instead of nidder. Sometimes it's even spelled in the play as nedir, so complete turnaround of the vowels, but clear from the context. CZ, like in setzt, stands for, simply for Z or a modern TZ. Lassen, the SZ is sometimes used, sometimes it's used just as a single S, sometimes a single Z. So don't be irritated, just use however you would pronounce it in modern German. Looking through it, so hervornehmen means to pull out. Helle actually is closer to English hell than to modern German Hölle. Yeah, and I've started then just to give the modern German equivalent, and you can work out what would be the normalized Middle High German from these rules. So, what the precursor is doing is actually structuring that, punctuated by calls for silence, so you can tell what was important to do. So 3 times comes zwiegt und setzt euch nieder, darum zwiegt und setzt euch nieder, darum sitzt und zwieget stille. So quite a clear reminder that it must have been aimed at a large audience, fairly unruly, not quite sure what they, how they should behave. And in between, so it's linguistically a very simple text, but structurally fairly complex. So in the way in which all good plays are done for dramatic effect, to give enough cliffhangers to keep the audience engaged, to pull out the significance of the topos time and again, and to have built in enough redundancy that the message hits home. So while in a poem to have 3 times the same line would be incredibly boring, in a play it serves a dramatic purpose that people are more and more aware of what is coming. Right. So, as I said, since it's a director's copy, it doesn't write out the music which the actors would have learned from other sources. So all of the Latin is actually based on liturgical pieces. So they could find these pieces in their liturgical manuscripts in church. So what is in the edition online marked with asterisks and in brackets is put in from liturgical sources. It's not in the manuscript, so we can't be absolutely sure that we've reconstructed it correctly, but since it's supposed to tie in with the liturgy. But it also means constantly there is a step back from the marketplace where the rowdy action takes place into the sphere of the church and the liturgical elements. Where you see these slashes, this is a change in folio number, so that's not part of the text. So the probably weirdest bit in the first scene is what is said, Tunc Judei cantant Judaicum. So they are singing a Jewish song, and that's a completely made up text that is made up in a way that it should sound to a non-Hebrew speaker as if it was Hebrew. But also sound comic. So it's part of the ridiculing of the Jews, which is a staple element of the mystery plays. So you have things like ending it with Amel, which sounds a bit like Amen, and as a bit isn't blasphemous, because if you were to use Amen for this mock prayer, you would also mock the Christian prayer. There are in between like Hebrew names, Ismail. There are elements from Latin, but they don't make grammatical sense. And Hebrew words like Adonai for Lord. Others just play on Hebrew word structure. So im is the masculine plural ending for nouns. So you have sosim, sisim, sosim, and others plays on other sounds that are also quite common in Hebrew. What's another interesting element, and something we'll come back more in the next session when we're looking at more integration of Latin chants into the play, is that quite often the figures that sing something in Latin will then start their next German speech with a kind of recap of what they've just sung. So what the Jew sings, the Audi Israel, is taken as actually an actual prayer based on the 5th book of Moses, Deuteronomy, and says, "Hear, O Israel," and so then his spoken part continues with "Du Hörer, Volk von Israel." When things are repeated, they aren't written out again to save paper. So here, just the stage direction is et sic vadunt ad Pilatum et cantant ut prius chaos. And this chaos must mean this Chodus Chadus Adonai, which had been written out on the previous folio. So then, yeah. There is a stage direction which shows that it must have, the stage and audience must have been as close as in the screenshot I showed you at the beginning, because you break the fourth wall, as it were. So constantly there is an interplay between the reality on the marketplace and on stage. So the nuntius runs around and would have pulled out the other players probably from the audience. A third time, this cantans Judaicum. Quite often things happen like in fairy tales for 3 times. And you have this singing at set intervals throughout the play to give a moment of reflection for the audience, also to allow movement from one station to the next. So they need to get to Pilatus, so a bit of a musical interlude is done. And we can assume that this, so every movement again stirs up the audience, so they'll laugh at this non-intelligible noise from the Jewish singers. They will move their position so as to see Pilate properly. So the angels have to be called upon to say Siletes, and then the action can continue. There is the first understandable, so non-Latin and not made up text when the soldiers sing, and that's more like a children's a nursery rhyme, and not really understandable what it means. Well, yeah. Right. Then the next stage instruction for them is to lie down and sleep, and then the angel tells Christ to rise, and then the probably most elaborate musical piece would have come, because the Resurrexi was the central liturgical chant during Easter night, which would have in the church been sung by a priest. And it might well be that at these plays also these key players who had to do the Latin singing were actually from the clergy, while you would have all these soldiers like shepherds in a nativity play. You probably had a dozen who wanted to rattle their spears, while it was harder to cast liturgical singers. One problem is always with humor in the plays. You never quite know what is meant. For example, with ihr sollt ihr Hundespulver lesen. Probably it's go and gather dog's poo, but whether that was a saying or so is not quite clear. And then the full first part ends with a stage fight, which is always a staple that you need to keep the extras happy, something they could get. And so that's all of the comic action is non-biblical, but put in for dramatic action and also to structure the whole thing. All right, so that was a very quick run through, and now we'll have the read through. Let's see whether we manage.
Hic incipit ludus de resurrectione Domini. Primo enim exiit Pilatus cum suis bellitibus. Expositor ludi dicit.
Vernehmet alle Grieche, beide arm und rieche, ihr Jungen mit den Alten, dass ihr Gott müsse walten. Zwiegt und setzt euch nieder zu der Erden. Wir wollen euch lassen kund werden, wie unser Herr ist entstanden, von des bittern Todesbanden, allem menschlichen Geschlechte zu Troste, damit er alle erlöste, und wie er fährt vor der helle Tor und will nehmen hervor, die sie ihnen Willen haben getan, beide Frauen und Mann, wie er die Helle zerstößt, vernichtet und entblößt, wann in 5000 Jahren kein Mensch so wohl mochte gebaren, es müsste spat oder fruh, jedoch der Helle zu und müsste die Pien lieben, des mochte es nicht vermieden, des will Gott Hüte Wedder bringen. Darum swieget und setzet euch nieder und secht dies Spiel züchtiglichen durch Gottes Willen des Riechen und merket aber vor was, dass ihr möget verstehen, beste was ich euch will bedüten, ihr seligen Christenlüten. Ich will euch kundtun, ihr möget gerne hören zu, wie die Juden da fahren und das Grab wollen bewahren. Mit Rittern mächtig und groß, die da sind der Juden Genoss, sie schunnen Hüte durch Gut, Jesum halten in ihrer Hut, darum sitzt und zwieget stille durch des lieben Gottes Willen.
Quo facto Pilatus cantat ingressus pil. Post haec ingressus Pilatus templum Judeorum congregabit omnes principes sacerdotum et grammaticus et scribas et legis doctoris et ingressus est cum eis in sacrarium templi et dicit.
Ich bin Pilatus genannt, ein König in der Judenland, und will hier ein Richter sitzen, dass alle Juden müssen schwitzen. Wird Jesus aufstehen, so müssen wir alle das Leben lahen. Servus respondet Domino suo et dicit.
Herr, das will ich helfen bewahren, sollte ich darum ausfahren. Wir wollen schicken Lüte zu dem Grabe, dass der Stein ich werde geworfen habe. Tunc Judei cantam Judaicum.
Rodus, Rodus, Adonai, Sebados, Sisim, Sosim, Jochum, Jochum, Orno, Jochum, Ornogun, Gral et Ismael, Lili, Lancelare, Uzerando, Atelaro, Dilando, Sicut ver medio Jesse, Koika, Koika, Koi, Capiasse, Amel.
Primus Judeus cantat, Audi Israel, Precepta Domini, quae ego dociote, ut fortins ihr. Nicht?
Okay. I'll sing it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good, yeah.
Audi Israel, Precepta Domini, quego dotio te, ut faciuns vivas, and ingredients possidia terram, quam Dominus Deus Patrum Vestrorum, daturus est vobis. Nur Hörer, Volk von Israel, was ich dir nur sagen will. Jesus, der sich nannte Gott und uns verstörte unser Gebot, der ist nur tot und hindert uns nicht mehr, nur dünket mich gut, dass wir gehen zu Pilatus mit Guten und lassen des Grabes huten. Secundus Judeus dicit.
Zwar, du hast uns gegeben einen guten Rat, es soll nicht länger werden gespart. Wir wollen zu Pilaten gehen, den wollen wir bitten und flehen, dass er es tun durch seine Wertigkeit und wie uns 4 Ritter wohlgemalt, die hüten bei dem Grabe, die Nacht und die Tage. Et sic varunt ad Pilatum, et cantant ut prius chaos.
Rodus, Rados, Radonai, Sebados, Sisim, Sosim, Jochun, Jochun, Orno, Jochun, Ornogun, Imbrael et Ismael, Lili, Lancelare, Uzerando, Ate, Lahudilando, Sicut vir medio Jesse, Koika, Koika, Koi, Capiasse, Amen.
Et inclinam sibi, quibus Pilatus dicit.
Ihr Herren, sieht mir Wille kommen, habet ihr nur Meere vernommen, oder ist ihr Geschicht alle, dass ihr kommet mit großem Schalle? Tertius Judeus dicit.
Pilate, edler König Fri, dass dir Salbe waren wie. Ich fürchte, wir kamen in große Not, Jesus, den wir schlugen, tot. Der mochte weder aufsteh und weder aus dem Grabe geh. Darum gib uns den getronen Rat, wann es uns wehrlichen Stat. Pilatus dicit.
Meine Rat will ich euch geben, auch ist es mir wohl selber eben. Ihr Herren, dunk es als euch echt gut, als ich han gedacht in meine Mut, meinen Botten will ich senden, und allen Enden, so wied in fremde Land, wenn er ist wohl bekannt, ob er sie alle 4 könnte erfahre, die das Grab mochten bewahren. Quartus Judeus dicit.
Da muss auch ein Ende haben, wenn da ist niemand bei dem Grabe. Soll das Grab alleine stehen? Jesus, der mochte rausgehen. Pilatus sieget ad nuntium.
Wohl Ufbotte und bis gereit, lauf in alle Jüdischheit, ab jemand welde nehmen sollt, beide Silber und Gold, und wolle hüten bei dem Grabe die Nacht und die Tage. Nuntius dicit.
Herre, das will ich wohl werbe, adi ich muss morgen sterbe. Et sic nuntius cult, hinc et inde in circulo et dicit. Nu höret alle Grieche, beide Arm und Rieche, und hört, was ich ton bekannt, min Herre, der hat mich losgesandt. Ab jemand wollte nehmen sollt, beide Silber und Gold, und wollte hüten bei dem Grabe, die Nacht und die Tage. Primus milis dicit ad nuntium.
Botte, nur sagt dem Herrn, wie unseren höchsten Ehren, dass wir wollen zu ihm komme, es geh zu Schaden oder zu Frommen, und wollen das tun gar rate, es seh früh oder sparte. Nuntius recedet et vadet ad Pilatum et dicit.
Edler König Pilate, dir entbieten 4 Ritter Drate, dass sie wollen zu dir kommen, als sie von dir haben vernommen. Pilatus dicit.
Geh hen und heiß sie zu mir kommen. Es wehrt ihr Ehre und auch ihr Frommen. Ich muss sie zu Nöten haben, wenn da ist niemand bei dem Grabe. Nuntius dicit ad Pilatum.
Pilate, lieber Herr min, lass dir die Bühne nicht lang sehen. Nuntius exit et conducit milites ad Pilatum, cantans Judaicum,
Hodus rados Adonai, sebados sissim, sosim, Jochum ornol gun, Imbrahel et Ismael, Lili lancelare, Uzzerando ate lahe lugando, Sicut fermelior esse, koi, capiasse, amen. Siletis. Secundus miles dicit.
Pilate, als du uns hast entboten, ruhe dich bei dir den Boten, dass wir Schulden kommend rate, es sie froh der Sparte. Nur sind wir herkommen zu dir, was du gebotest, das tun wir. Pilatus dicit.
Ja, sie mögen wohl sehen allhi, die bei dem Grabe sollen sie. Quintus Judäus dicit.
Ihr Herren, wo ihr nehmen sollt, beide Silber und Gold, und wollet hüten bei dem Grabe 3 Nacht und 3 Tage. Wir wollen euch geben Lohn und Lohnswert und alles, des euer Herz begehrt. Tertius milis dicit.
Wir wollen nehmen euer Gabe und wollen hüten bei dem Grabe und wollen es tun mit solchem Fließe, dass ihr es uns nimmer sollt verwiese. Et sic milites vadunt ad sepulchram cantando. Wir wollen zu dem Grabe gehen, Jesus, der will aufstehen. Ist das wahr, so sind Gulden unser Haar. Quartus miles dicit, ante sepulchrum.
Gesellen, lieben Gesellen mien, wir schulden auch hintermunder sehen. Wenn wir wohl haben vernommen, dass Jesus Jüngern wollen kommen und wollen uns stehen den Leichnam und sprechen, sie von dem Tode erstammen. Primus milis dicit.
Trüben Gesellen, das soll sien, nur lange mir her, das wehrt min, ab Jesus Jüngern kommen, sie sollen sie nehmen, keinen Frommen, wollen sie den Leichnam von hinnen tragen, sie werden von uns gar wohl zerschlagen. Als Sieg ponunt se dormitum. Tunc, Angelus percutiens exit cantando. Exoge Dominic, exoge caret pop dominis domini, exoge et nere pellas in finem, et dicit.
Stand auf, lieber Herr Gott, und erfülle des Vaters Gebot. Tun Hüte den armen Seelen Wulfe schienen, die da lieben große Pien. Sie legen allzu lange in des Finsternis Getwange, tu Hüte auf den heilige Hand, und zu bricht der helle Band, und nehm daraus die Mann, die dienen Willen haben getan. Jesus cantat.
Resurrexit ad hoc tecum sum. Als Sabbatorum.
Pilatus dicit ad nuntium.
Ja, Pilatus dicit ad nuntium.
Ante Pilatus.
Ah, ja. Botte, wohl auf, schnell und drabe und lauf beide zu dem Grabe. Heißt die Ritter nicht schlafen und heiß sie ihn haben ihr Waffen. Ob Jesus welde aufstan, dass sie ihn wieder niederschlagen. Nuntius currit ad sepulchrum et dicit.
Ihr Ritter, ihr schuld nicht schlafen und schuld wie euch haben ihr Waffen. Ab Jesus welde aufstan, ihr schuld ihn wieder niederschlagen. Nemo respondet, sed nuntius velociter currit ad Pilatum et dicit. Bald, Herre, nun wohl dann, wollt ihr sie Schlafende fahren? Pilatus wartet cum nuncio ad sepulchrum et dicit.
Wenn ihr wollt Ritter wesen, so sollt ihr Hundespulver lesen. Das wäre euch Bass angeboren, wenn das ihr traget Ritterssporen. Sogund tertius miles dicit.
Herre, wir wollen sphären bei unseren ritterlichen Ehren. Hüte, da der Tag anbrach, groß Ungemach uns geschah. Da kam ein Engel herrlich, von dem hohen Himmel riech. Er schlug uns sagen, wir wären tot. Wir kommen nie in großer Not. Quartus miles dicit.
Ach, Zeter und Waffen, hier ist zu lange geschlafen, uns ist gestohlen der Leichnam. Das haben Jesus Jüngern getan, wir sind kühne Recken zu einem warmen Becken. Primus miles dicit.
Das ist alles die Schuld gewesen. Ich furcht, wir können nicht wohl genesen. Secundus miles dicit.
Ich höre wohl, was du hast gesprochen. Es muss an dir werden gerochen, wenn du lügest als ein rechter Schall. Tertius miles dicit.
Thron, des gilt mir auch den Balg. Et percutiunt semodicum ad oram.
Das sparen wir uns jetzt.